For almost 2 centuries, Norwich, Connecticut was one of the most prosperous, creative towns in New England. Its contributions in art, industry, and public affairs, its beautiful streets and greens, and the epic personalities associated with the town made it a sort of cultural lighthouse in eastern Connecticut. The town has tremendous assets and enormous potential to become one of the leading cultural heritage destinations in southern New England. What's needed is a vision and a plan. This documentary proposes that if stakeholders rally around a good plan and aspire to help one another, Norwich will realize its destiny as a destination. The art of placemaking and the lure of the local are twin concepts that speak to the power of place, past, and community as a basis for sustainable economic development. By taking stock of our assets, we can better manage and develop the resources we have while seeing and seizing the potential of assets we may overlook. It's all about standing out in a crowd. Of course, it helps if you have assets. Most places do not have what it takes to become destinations, but of those that do, many aren't sure how to promote and present themselves. As Lucy Lepard notes, few towns yearning for business have any idea of the attractions hidden in their back streets. The process of discovery is about turning over every stone and laying out a plan and vision. Identities and place markers matter. Place image marketing is all about staking out your turf in the landscape of cultural heritage branding. Transit-oriented development, walking cities, places with good bones and rich heritage. This is what development and a younger demographic seek, and what places like Norwich, upper left, Portland, Maine, upper right, and New London in the center have or could have to their advantage. Okay, so most places don't look like Yosemite, but public gardens, lakes, and rivers and related natural features are like gold. The local foods movement is on the rise, revolutionizing how we think, eat, and talk about food and working lands. Great architecture represents the triumph of aspiration over inertia. Places people care about are loaded with buildings people care about. The built environment is rich in place markers and evidence of cultural expression and aspiration. Tombstone tourism, as it's called, combines genealogy and art in natural settings that are often resplendent. The art of placemaking is about artists using place, past, and community as their inspiration and muse. Murals, past and present, impressionism, and history painting create civic narrative and deepen our sense of place. While every place obviously has a history, many places also have a rich art history, told through paintings, sculpture, decorative arts, and artifacts. A community's story is also told in its industrial products. Inventors, industrialists, distinctive products. If you've got it or had it, flaunt it. It makes for a compelling narrative. Museums and historic sites preserve and present a community's treasures, wherein lie the genius of place, the sparkling facets that tell your story. Galleries, distinctive foodways, and unique independent retail are ingredients of places that people like to visit, patronize, and remember. Let's discover Norwich. Founded in 1659, of all the towns in Connecticut that were major centers during the colonial and early national period, Norwich has preserved the most and provides the most alluring sense of time travel. Known as the Rose of New England, Norwich is situated at the mouths of the Quinebaug and Chautauqua rivers, where they form the headwater of the majestic Thames, Connecticut's most important deep-sea port, and home to the U.S. Navy submarine base. During the Agrarian Age, Norwich was the primary port for eastern Connecticut's vast agricultural hinterland, and a place where highways, railroads, and maritime trade and transportation converged. Norwich is popular with fishermen and has one of the most attractive marinas in Connecticut that features elegant waterside dining. Its hilly terrain and natural features are striking. This is a view of the famous Rose Garden at Mohegan Park. Norwich has the largest concentration of colonial houses of any city in Connecticut. The historic district of Norwich Town is circled by important landmarks, including the First Church, an architectural masterpiece by Norwich native architect Lavius Fillmore. Norwich houses provide a veritable textbook of American architectural history, with superb examples in every style and period. The Chelsea waterfront district downtown was redeveloped in the industrial age and was never ravaged by urban renewal. Old, older, and new coexist side by side in harmony of scale, pattern, and texture. The legacy of the industrial age includes some amazing houses like the Leonard Bacon House shown on the left, designed by Worcester architect Stephen Earle. The pride of Norwich is the recently restored 1855 Warrigan Hotel, where Abraham Lincoln spent the night while campaigning for the presidency in 1860. On the right is Norwich's 1870 City Hall. About a dozen architecturally distinctive houses of worship and the original building of the Otis Memorial Library shown here on the left. The 1893 Norwich Savings Bank is a tour de force of the highly sculptural French chateau style. Its location at the corner of Main and Broadway gives a European flair to this prominent intersection. What made Norwich rich were these grand cathedrals of the industrial age, enormous mills that made Norwich and the Blackstone Valley corridor a major center of American textile manufacturing for 150 years. The great Panoma cotton mill in the Tassville section of town began in 1866 and expanded in additions until 1910. At its peak, it employed 1,600 workers and produced 20 million yards of fabric a year, continuing production until 1972. Tombstone tourism. Visitors to Norwich make a beeline for its historic burying grounds and cemeteries, a veritable gallery of folk art with hundreds of stones lettered and decorated by eastern Connecticut's famous folk carvers. The old burying ground in Norwich town is scenic and historic. Winged angels, death heads, and alien humanoid faces make exploring fun. On the left is a stone marking the grave of Boston Trow Trow, described as the governor of the African tribe. In the center, a small stone marks the grave of John Post, who died in 1710 and was born a decade before Connecticut was founded. On the right is Benedict Arnold's mother. Overlooking the Chelsea district downtown is the equally historic Arcadian burying ground, where you will find a stone marking the grave of Jabez Perkins, who died in a hurricane at sea, a reminder of the town's maritime heritage. Yantic Cemetery is the final resting place of Norwich's industrial age families and elites, including numerous Civil War generals and wartime Governor William Buckingham. Present-day Norwich was the center of the Mohegan tribe. Yantic Falls, also called Indian Leap and shown here, is a sacred meeting place in Mohegan lore and was the site of the famous tribal battle between the Mohegans and Narragansetts. It has been a tourist destination since the 18th century. Painted and photographed by artists for generations, it is one of the most historic and picturesque locations in Connecticut. Then there are Norwich's museums. The Queen Bee is a Slater Memorial Art Museum. Founded by William Albert Slater in 1886, it is owned and administered by Norwich Free Academy, and it is the most intact Victorian-era art museum in America. Its building, designed by architect Stephen Earle, is a masterpiece of Romanesque design. The museum presents the tale, treasures, and trophies of William Slater's grand tour of Europe aboard his steam yacht Eleanor. It also houses the finest collection of plaster casts of great European sculptural masterpieces in the country, picturesque, classical, fascinating. There are galleries of locally made art, decorative arts, and firearms, evidence of the town's extraordinary art history. Within walking distance are the Bacchus and Rockwell House Museums of the Faith Trumbull chapter of the Daughters of the American Revolution. These ladies were devout antiquarians who started collecting a century ago when antiques were abundant and affordable. They have great stuff and outstanding archives. including wonderful ceramics, historic blue and white plates, this famous china-painted punch bowl decorated by Mrs. E.H. Riley, and this rare 18th century agate-ware teapot that came to them with the story of an aged Janet Gordon from Voluntown who in 1774 wanted to be patriotic but couldn't wean herself off tea. That's what we call a priceless provenance. A Willow Works chair made in Sam Colt's Hartford factory, a Civil War belt buckle mutilated when it stopped a bullet, and Governor Jonathan Trumbull's French-made pistols. Gives you goosebumps to see things like this. Then there are the 18th century textiles, a magnificent collection of handmade, locally stitched, crewel embroidered bed hangings. You won't find better examples in any museum in America. The premier attraction up Washington Street in Norwich Town is the Leffenwell House Museum, an architectural jewel with fabulous collections. Norwich was Connecticut's leading center of silversmithing in the early years. Shown here are works by silversmiths Joseph Carpenter, John Avery, and Thomas Harland, plus a rare silversmith's account book. These are real storybook collections, the kind of place where children experience the romance of history by seeing real things associated with real events and storied personalities from the past. On the left here is a surgeon's chest used in the American Revolution by Dr. Philip Turner, a silk pastoral needlework picture stitched by a young girl in a local female academy, and a Windsor armchair signed and made by Ebenezer Tracy in nearby Lisbon, Connecticut. Rare early American ceramics from Norwich potteries, and this English imported creamware punch ladle. You won't find another one of those on display anywhere in Connecticut. The Leffenwell House has two of the most spectacular pieces of pre-1730 pilgrim furniture with original painted decoration. Doesn't get any better than this. It's amazing to think that chair makers in the 17th and 18th century produced chairs so different from one town to the next that when experts look at these, they instantly know they are Norwich chairs. Fashions change, and Norwich chairmakers like Felix Huntington kept adapting the new fashions with a local accent. These three chairs in the so-called Queen Anne style each have their rare original seats, two embroidered and one made of splint. One of the greatest discoveries in American furniture was made right here, the use of tooled and painted leather upholstery on Norwich-made chairs in the Chippendale style. The material is imported, and boy was it expensive. Chests and desks like these were fashion icons in the 18th century. They didn't have to import stuff this good. It was made right here by skilled cabinet makers. Norwich was the birthplace of the clockmaking industry in Connecticut. Thomas Harland, whose work is shown here, was trained in England before migrating to Norwich in 1773. He trained generations of apprentices who fanned out around the state and region, developing Connecticut's clock industry into a powerhouse that eventually achieved international dominance. Vine Welch, Joseph Carpenter, John Avery, Nathaniel Shipman, and Thomas Harland are some of the names associated with the origins of the elite colonial trade of clockmaking in Norwich. Clockmakers were metalsmiths. Most also made silver. Here are some treasures in Norwich museums: a pepper caster that belonged to the family of Great Awakening minister Jonathan Edwards, a tea urn made by Joseph Carpenter, and a spoon made by a Norwich blacksmith for George Washington while stationed at Valley Forge. Clockmakers may also have made these brass bed warmers. Early bed warmers aren't rare, but these are two of the best anywhere, including the one on the right that is signed and dated Norwich 1779 and decorated with an engraved bird. You'll never see another this good. During the Industrial Age, Norwich foundries produced decorative cast iron parlor stoves. Whatever it was that inspired that generation to turn home heating into works of art is apparent here. Samplers and needleworks have generated tremendous new scholarship and excitement in recent years. Norwich girls and academies produce some of the best, including this amazing colorful multi-panel picture by Nancy Carew, another in the right by 12-year-old Alice Mather, and the monumental Chandler family image of genteel estate living with enslaved servants from the 1750s in the lower right, a pastoral dated 1745 by Elizabeth Lathrop. Young girls also embroidered pocketbooks and detachable pockets. These examples from the period of the American Revolution are extraordinary. Then there are the faces of Norwich, from Reverend Benjamin Lord, who lived and preached from the 1720s through the end of the American Revolution, to Anna Brewster Fanning, painted by the famous deaf-mute artist John Brewster, Jr. on the right. Local museums own dozens of portraits that reveal the face of Norwich before the age of photography. Shown here are portraits by Norwich artists John Dennison Crocker and Alexander Emmons, of Captain Samuel Story, the famous historian Francis Calkins, the Bill Boys with a view of Norwich over their shoulder, and the daughters of William Norton. Then there are the many townscape views of Norwich in various media, prints, postcards, photographs, and oil paintings. Situated on a hillside at the confluence of three rivers, Norwich is picturesque and telegenic. This lithographic view of Norwich from the west side of the river in 1849 shows a city as transportation hub linking sea and rail. Norwich artist John Dennison Crocker dabbled in everything to make a living, a legacy that documented not just the face, but the place and its history. The lithograph showing Norwich from the west side of the river, shown in the last slide, was based on a painting shown here in the lower left. The upper left shows the famous scene of the capture of Narragansett's chief Miantonomo by the Mohegans in 1643. He was executed after his capture. Norwich's picturesque beauty attracted artists with national reputations. On the left is a view by J. Alden Weir, and on the right by Fitzhugh Lane. Then there are the great stories and personalities. Mohegan sachem Uncas, who befriended the English and allied with them in the famous war against the Pequots in 1637. President Andrew Jackson laid the cornerstone for the monument to Uncas, whose life inspired James Fenimore Cooper's The Last of the Mohegans. Present-day Norwich is the heart of Mohegan country. The Mohegan Sun Casino, one of the largest in North America, is located nearby on tribal lands adjoining the Thames River. Benedict Arnold, next to Washington, the most storied and successful general of the American Revolution, was born and raised in Norwich, where he apprenticed as an apothecary, and where his birthplace, now demolished, is marked by a plaque. His mother is buried in Norwich town. Landmarks and artifacts keep this epic story alive in historic Norwich. Samuel Huntington, a lawyer, statesman, and patriot, and signer of the Declaration of Independence, moved to Norwich from his birthplace in nearby Scotland, Connecticut, in 1754. He was elected President of the Continental Congress and is buried in the Norwich Town Burying Ground. Shown below is the house that he lived in. Norwich was a hotbed of anti-slavery sentiment with outposts on the Underground Railroad. Aaron Stevens, shown here with his sister the night before his execution for treason, was a member of John Brown's Provisional Army, captured after the failed assault on Harper's Ferry. A statuette of John Brown by Connecticut native sculptor Paul Bartlett, now at the Slater Museum, may have been commissioned with the idea of erecting a public statue. In 1863, the city celebrated the Emancipation Proclamation with a 100-gun salute and the ringing of church bells for an hour. Norwich is especially proud of its association with Abraham Lincoln, who campaigned there in 1860. A famous Lincoln campaign banner made for the occasion has been preserved. William Buckingham, the Civil War time governor of Connecticut and one of Lincoln's staunchest allies, was from Norwich. His home was later used as a museum and meeting hall for the Norwich chapter of the Grand Army of the Republic Veterans Group. A magnificent granite Civil War statue embellishes Chelsea Parade across from the Slater Memorial Museum. Frances Calkins, one of the great women historians of the 19th century, wrote early histories of Norwich and New London. On the right is Lydia Sigourney, whose poetry and prose achieved international acclaim. Born and raised in Norwich, in 1811 she opened a female academy there before relocating to Hartford. In Norwich, the past is present. It is still a great walking city with landmarks, history, and things of beauty at every turn. More than almost any town in Connecticut, Norwich has what it takes to become an A-list cultural heritage destination. Achieving that will require persistence, investment in the development of the attractions, a clear and compelling plan, and a spirit of commonwealth where stakeholders help one another and work together to create an experience that is bigger than the sum of its parts. Bill Hosley, the principal of Terra Firma Northeast, assists communities in telling their story and developing cultural master plans that transform assets into destinations. For information, contact us at billhosley.com or WNHOSLEY@snet.net. Thanks for watching and welcome to Norwich, the Rose of